In 1939, as the situation in Europe worsened, the government of the Commonwealth of Australia decided to increase the capacity for the manufacture of munitions and explosives. One such expansion was to commission ICI ANZ Proprietary Limited to design, construct, and then to operate an explosives facility in the area known as Deer Park to the west of Melbourne. This would be located on farmland on the north side of Ballarat Road, opposite the existing commercial factory being operated by that company. The 500-acre area selected lay between Ballarat Road and Cororoit Creek in the south, Station Road in the west, and Furlong Road to the north. The major products would be propellants for small arms and artillery ammunition, the high explosive TNT, a range of armament chemicals and nitric acid. Nitroglycerin would be needed for the propellants and the recovery and reconcentration of nitric and sulfuric acids necessary for the production of TNT and nitroglycerin. The factory commenced production in 1940 during the Second World War. Some 1,500 people worked on the site, and many tons of TNT and propellants were produced. The factory was known initially as the No. 5 Explosives Annex, and later as the Albion Explosives Factory. It's interesting that the locality of Deer Park is not included in the name, probably to avoid confusion with the long-established ICI ANZ factory known by that name. However, as is common with all similar establishments, the location was covered by the unique station monogram, by which all product lot numbers were preceded, MDK, being the initial and final letters of Deer Park. During this time, a number of significant developments took place. For example, the improved manufacture of nitric acid, the establishment of the synthetic ammonia plant, which was one of the earliest in Australia, with techniques rendering the older process obsolete. At the end of hostilities in 1945, the site continued to be managed by ICI ANZ on a care and maintenance basis. Explosives Factory Maribyrnong took over control of the Albion factory in 1948. The potassium nitrate plant converted to produce ammonium sulfate for fertilizer, thereby utilizing the synthetic ammonia plant. In the early 1950s, as the Cold War developed, the government looked to modernize the production of high explosives and wished to commence manufacture of RDX. This was a powerful and safe explosive, which had been discovered in Britain in the 1930s using a production process where all the raw materials were available without importation. These were in fact air, water, and coal. To do this, additional land was necessary, and the size of the factory was effectively doubled with the acquisition of land north of Furlong Road to Gladstone Street, St Albans. As well as the RDX plant being constructed, other work included the upgrading of the acid section to handle the very highly concentrated nitric acid. The continuous process plant for the manufacture of RDX commenced operation in April 1957 and ran regularly for nearly 30 years, producing mainly RDX TNT compositions and plastic explosives for demolition purposes. Other new plants were added to the factory. One was the continuous Biazzi plant for the manufacture of nitroglycerin. The old batch TNT plant was refurbished in 1960, but was later superseded by a modern, continuous, much safer plant in the 1970s. Further additions and improvements were made throughout the factory. New horizontal presses were added to the capability in the 1960s and used for rocket and large caliber gun propellants. A new effluent treatment plant was installed when Deer Park was sewered. Some of the unwanted facilities, such as the carbamide and titanium tetrachloride plants the fuse powder and propellant powder, and the small arms cordite plants were never reactivated after the war, and these buildings slowly deteriorated. The factory was at its largest level of capacity from the late 1970s. However, suburbia was encroaching, and what was once a rural area far from any residential locations found itself being surrounded by schools and shopping centres, and ever-increasing concerns by its neighbours that their safety was being compromised by the continuing presence of a high-explosive production plant in their midst. The Albion Explosives site housed hundreds of sheep. This was to keep the many acres of grass controlled. The site also had its own shearing shed. The factory was closed in 1986, and an extensive program of cleanup and remediation was undertaken. This involved the decontamination of plant buildings and the disposal of the arisings. First, the nature and extent of the contamination had to be identified and the appropriate course of action determined. The overall cost was about $50 million, with some 400,000 cubic meters of contaminated soil, basically explosives residues, heavy metals, and asbestos, being removed. Some went to landfill and the rest kept on site, some to the rehabilitation of less sensitive areas, and the remainder to a secure repository now known as Gateway Hill. Environmental clearances were given wherever possible for residential use. A reserved area has been set aside where the legless lizard was discovered during a fauna and flora survey. This borders alongside a wetland area specially designed to reduce the contamination flowing into Jones Creek. Now the only reminder of the factory and all who worked there is the Black Powder Mill, Building 745. This was saved by the efforts of many individuals and organisations, including the National Trust of Australia, Victoria, and a local group, Friends of the Black Powder Mill. Brimbank City Council agreed to keep the mill, and funds were obtained for its renovation and the refurbishment of the machinery to allow it to run for demonstration purposes. Brimbank's mayor launched it in December 2003, and operation of the mill was achieved in June 2005. The mill's inclusion on state and Commonwealth heritage listings testifies to its importance. The mill now stands as a reminder of the thousands of workers who were employed in the munitions and defence industries in the western suburbs of Melbourne since the first factories were established there over 100 years ago.